Hello, and welcome to our on-location broadcast of When the Dust Settles, Poaching, Commission Cuts, and Other Vexing Issues. We're here in the offices of Visit Indy at the Indiana Convention Center during MPI WEC 2018 in Indianapolis. Our presenters today are veteran meetings industry experts, Marianne Bobrow, President of Bobrow Associates, Michael Owen, Managing Partner of Eventgenuity and past Chair of the Events Industry Council's Apex Standards Committee, and Michael Dominguez, Senior Vice President and Chief Sales Officer for MGM Resorts International. Welcome and thanks for taking time to participate.
Thank you.
Welcome everyone out there in computer TV land. We have a few topics on the agenda today. The meeting's landscape has been roiled by one game-changing issue after another recently, with Marriott and Hilton cutting commissions for independent planners, and room poaching issues finally coming to a head in the legal arena. Both of these issues, and others that are just now bubbling to the surface, are causing a major disruption in the industry. First, let's talk about independent commission cuts. Major hotel brands have taken different stances on independent commissions, and an independent planner group has arisen to combat the cuts. What lies in the future for commissions? Will they ultimately go away, just as group concessions have diminished? Michael?
Well, I'm not sure why anyone should be surprised. As a small company, that's a small part of what we do. We're fee-based, right? So our clients know what they're paying us. We do have clients who ask us to source hotels. I've sourced a couple with MGM, in fact. But it's always been transparent and out in the open. As someone, I come from the entertainment industry. That's how I got my start. So we all worked on commission. I worked on commission for years. And when it comes to hotels, it's kind of a strange model if you think about it, that you are, as a sourcer, you are working for the client, but the hotel is paying you. Now, we value that portion of what we make, but the only reason we got into it was our clients asking us to do it and understand that the model allowed them to help underwrite the cost of our being there, right? So for us, it's not a big deal. For a lot of people, it's their entire business model and it's their entire way of being paid. I will say that while it doesn't disrupt us as a company, that the way it was rolled out was offensive to me, just being honest, is that the way it came out was, if you're spending a lot of money with you, with us, we value you, but if you're not, then see you later. That doesn't change anything. If somebody asks us to source Marriott, we're going to source Marriott, but at the same time, we have we have partners in the hotels who have come to us and said, if you weren't with this client, we wouldn't have them in our building. Because we're hired to bring professionalism from the industry standpoint and industry standards to what these clients do. Because many of them are in procurement, they're in marketing, they're CEO, executive assistant, and they know what they're doing, just like we know what we're doing as well. So the partnership, I think, with the hotels went further than just sourcing a room and saying, see you later. It still is a true partnership. I mean, we have to work under the circumstances that we have, whether it's 7 points or 10 points or what have you. And then we have to be, we're just like Mike's business, Marianne's business, your business. We have overhead, we have cost, and we got to make a reasonable profit. That's all we want to do. Well, I'm not interested. I got to make a living, not a killing. That's what I say all the time. We got to make a living. And if we're working in a situation where that bucket has dried up or reduced, then our client understands that this is the fee for us to be there, and they typically will pay it. So we're a little bit different than the others. As far as I think the true independent planner, not necessarily the big, larger companies, but third parties, I think the true independent planner, I think that's a business segment that's underserved in our industry broadly. And an independent planner could be someone with just an office or a bedroom that's an office or something, or they could be somebody with 40 people, 50 people working for them. There's a variety of models that are in there. I think it's interesting to see that there's an association bubbling up, if that makes sense. I'm not sure that a reduction in commissions is a great reason to start an association. That's just my opinion. What do you guys think?
Well, I think
I know what you think.
we don't have 7 hours, Mike.
Easy.
I just think that, like you, the third-party model is somewhat convoluted when you think about it, because there's a contract with a hotel and the client, where the client is served by the third party, so there's a contractual relationship there. And then the hotel is obligated in a contractual basis to the third-party planner. So where do the loyalties lie? And it's kind of difficult, as Michael said, when it was rolled out. It was done, in my opinion, too quickly and without forethought to the feedback that they were going to get. And as I understand it, they didn't even bother to tell all of their own people that this was being rolled out. So the third parties are calling their contacts and they're going, I don't know what it is. So it was not the best move on the part of management, but more importantly, for the third party, like Michael, I don't take commissions generally. Do I think there's anything wrong with them? No, as long as there's the transparency. You know, if someone comes to me and says, I can't afford it, will you do this on commission? And for those that don't understand that commission, it could not be paid off for 3 to 5 years, depending on the contract. It's not like you're going to get that money tomorrow. So these third-party people who rely on the commissions have budgets that are forecast on money they're supposed to be getting 3 to 5 years down the line. So they have to do the accountability for it and all that. So now they're being stunned into an association-type mentality when, in effect, it's more of a union mentality of fighting an issue rather than supporting the profession, which is what an association typically is for. So, Mike, what do you think?
Like I've been on record of, on this issue specifically to talk about, the comment that keeps coming back to me most often that I said was, I just did the math. And when I start to do the math doesn't make a lot of sense. And I say that with all due respect. You know, my competing organizations, they're welcome to do whatever they want to do. It's their business model. That is not my critique at all. When we looked at it, it was quite interesting that it's hard for me to know that we've been out here educating, and in your careers, how many times have we told you that the entire contribution matters?
Right.
Everything you're bringing to the table is going to matter for me to set rate and pricing and everything else. But in this argument, all of a sudden, we're not even caring about the rest of that contribution because we are isolated on the cost that comes with the room. And when I look at just our model and we look at the data that's been provided in the industry nationwide, you know, almost 60% of the revenues with the group market are non-rooms. Mm-hmm. And why is that not part of the consideration? And when we talked about it as a leadership group, I talked about, here's my catering revenue, here's what I make in meeting room rental, here's what we make in AV rentals, here's all of the ancillary that comes with it. And at the end of the day, if I marry it all up, I'm probably paying 6.5% on total revenue. I know the profit margins are different, I get all that, but we cannot sit here as an industry, keep telling our partners that all contributions are important, and now say, but that doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter that you're giving me any of that because my catering's not commissionable, my meeting room rental's not commissionable. The only thing that's commissionable is the room. And when I say do the math, it's the one thing that sticks out. I just do the math.
Right.
And it's a saying I tell my team all the time, and I do the math, it just doesn't add up. When I look at it, one of the things we looked at is we do see, still firm believers, it's how we do business, that relationships matter, partnerships matter. The 10% modeling, we've looked at it saying, how do we, over the last 5 to 6 years that I've been at MGM, we've been working with our customers to say, how do we get the business to work for both of us?
Right.
And we've spent all of our efforts, and it's not about, okay, I'm going to pay you 10%, great. What I'm trying to do is I need to shrink your load in, I need to shrink your load out, I need you to work as a partner, I need you to get your customer to move out of that one room so I can book something else in front of it. And
Exactly.
I'm making much more money than any 3%. And when I do the math, it's just not material when I look at the numbers.
You know, Michael, is that this is kind of, it dovetails into what I was saying. I mean, if you look at it from both sides, I mean, clearly I work for the client. Client who has retained our services. All right, so I have a responsibility to the client, but I also have a responsibility to the care and feeding and well-being of everybody else. I understand everybody's got to make money. I also understand that fitting that room and getting off the loading dock and all of those issues that someone who doesn't do this all the time doesn't understand, right? Somebody said the other day to me that we're in a business where nobody knows about what we do until we don't do it.
Right. I agree.
And that's where the professionalism comes in. Mm-hmm. And you know, on the other hand, from an independence, my advice to our independent friends out there is prove your value to your clients. If you can demonstrate value, they're okay with paying you a fair wage.
Right.
You know, but it's the partnership. I mean, I don't go into a hotel or a hotel negotiation with the idea of battling. It's to your point. I love this. I love that phrase. Is how can we make this work for everybody?
Yeah.
And leave it, and they call me again, and I call you again, and that's the way it's supposed to work.
I agree, and you know, I look at it when we're looking at those partnerships, and we say relationships matter, and we look at those partnerships differently. I remind everybody, it was those same partners that were standing with us on October 1st in Las Vegas, convincing and making sure our customers continued with their meetings, making sure they worked with us diligently to make that effective. And it's because it's a partnership. It's because it's much larger than a transaction. And what I find this discussion being is transactional, and we're getting away from what the industry was. So yes, we look at it a little differently, and I'm not saying it's not an important discussion. I think one of the things that's being missed with some of these discussions, especially with some of the companies and their thought process, because I've gotten emails directly from corporate customers that are now part of a strategic meetings management program that this is built into. So they hire Michael, they pay him his fee, but they're expecting this 10% because it's modeled into their business. The biggest piece is that that's been one of the largest growths in our industry. And if you are not recognizing that these companies, they're not going to just pay more. Their budget's not going to move 30% because we're going into a different model. They're either going to cut it in other areas in that budget, or they're going to take it somewhere else. And I have literally gotten emails from customers that are part of those programs, and they were thanking me when my words were printed. And the exact email that I actually sent to one of my bosses, and he's like, thank you, that was awesome. But the email simply said, thank you for your support. Thank you for being articulate in this delicate discussion. And then the comment was, need you to know that those that are moving have been moved to the bottom of my search list. And more importantly, even if they have availability, they will remain at the bottom of the list.
Well,
I sent that to my boss because that is a corporate customer. It has nothing to do with a third party.
Right.
And that is a piece of this that's getting thrown into this that nobody's thinking about. And that's my bigger concern, because there has to be an understanding of those FSMM models and what it means and how they're built. And there is no corporate customer I know that's going to take their budget up that much year over year just because we decide to change our models.
That's a very valid point. And when you think about it, this whole thing has put the classic third-party independent planner, it's thrown them for a loop, because now they get to be the bad guy, because they have to make up that difference and do the math on that one, what that's going to mean to their pocketbook, and how can they ethically deal with their clients and not deal with the two biggest companies. There's not an MGM everywhere, let's face it. So, and I know other hotel brands like Hyatt have said they're not going to do it either. And I applaud them for that. It's like the old airline theory. is one airline raises the rates and then everybody follows. And if they don't do that following, then what has happened? The one who tried to start it goes back with the rest of the pack because economically it doesn't make sense.
Well, you know, talking about independence in general, I think there's an opportunity for for our industry to address that segment more fully.
True.
With education, small business education, and a variety of those things. And I hope, I don't wish any harm on this movement that has spurred up.
No.
I just don't think it's a great reason to start an association because you feel like you're under attack.
Something I mentioned earlier, I think association's the wrong terminology.
Right.
I think there's an opportunity for them to be a consortia.
Right.
Yeah.
Which very much falls into our leisure side of our business because now you are pulling all of your volume and resources to negotiate on behalf of the consortia benefits and offerings. And we see that all the time on the leisure side. It is some of our biggest leisure customers were part of their consortia program. Well, it's a variety of agents. It could be hundreds or thousands of agents, but they're leveling or bringing to the table all of that leverage to say, this is what we're offering.
Right.
What can you offer this group?
That's interesting. That makes sense.
And it's, I know it's semantics, but to your point, an association has a different purpose
Yes.
versus a consortia.
Right.
Yeah.
But to come to a consortia, if you could get 900 independent planners and you're at $2 billion in spend, you now have something to go negotiate on behalf of the consortia, certain benefits and privileges that come along with us saying, you're part of our preferred program. We will be trying to book you first.
Great.
That's what happens on the other side of our business.
I like talking when I can learn new stuff. So I'll take that as my own, and I might give you credit.
I doubt it.
And I'm all right with it. That's good.
Just tell them Mike said so. They won't know who it is.
So are there ethical considerations between the independent planner and the planner's clients that should be addressed?
Absolutely there are. And for the planner who got thrown really blindsided, because remember there were certain groups that didn't, that weren't affected by it. So now you have planners who are doing lots and lots and lots of room nights who feel like they've been blindsided, and now they're put in an awkward situation between the hotels and the client. What if the client is a fan of a particular brand? Or maybe their members are, depending on who the group is. And now they're forced into a thing that makes them take a lower commission. Do they then ask the client to make up the difference? What's that going to do to their relationship? So it's put them in a very awkward position. I don't have any great answers for them. And hopefully they will find some ways to make it change. But it does put that planner in a very awkward position.
Well, and most of the planners I've talked to that are even independents, they understand their ethical responsibility. And that's where a little bit of their anger comes from, because they have to do what's best for the customer in most cases. But I will tell you, in certain cases, I've heard from their end user customer that has such a loyalty to the third party that they're more concerned about it than the third party. That's an interesting one, because I think we forget, and I go back to it again, and I know these two believe in it, relationships still matter.
Yep.
This is still a relationship business, and it's all good. It's all well and good with this kind of economy.
Right.
I'm curious on how this sticks as soon as we turn.
Exactly.
And we will turn someday. We always do.
Yeah,
Well, you promised me that last year.
I said someday. I'm still promising someday.
Well, no, the other thing is the cure for ethical issues is sunshine, right?
Yeah.
Is that transparency. And if you're transparent, and that's where I've heard a lot of folks say, well, you know, the commission thing, that as long as everybody knows what's going on and that you're upfront about it, our business model dictates that the client signs everything. If we do an off-site event, they sign the contract. If I do entertainment, they sign the contract. It's not like I used to be as an agent signing and making a commission. I make the same no matter what, which encourages me to give them the best advice. Right? And to tell them, maybe you don't need to spend $500,000 for maybe for $50,000 we can do this, or maybe we can bring in Cool in the Gang at 20% of whatever else you were thinking of. And they're really better than what you had.
Just stated yourself. Cool in the Game. Really good. Just FYI.
Well, let's see. It could have been Glenn Miller.
Just saying.
At least it wasn't Glenn Miller, so just. But it is about, I mean, our business model shifted. We celebrated 20 years in March, and our business model shifted at that point from, because I still do a lot of clients that I do only entertainment, so there's no room sources involved. But from representing acts to leveraging 30 years at that time, 30 years of experience and connections, but representing clients instead and working towards outcomes. And I think the good hotel partners work towards outcomes as well.
Absolutely.
You don't work towards, I'm going to make X on a pot of coffee that we always complain about. And you're not just paying for the pot of coffee. And no, you're also not just paying, well, the act only has to be there 2 hours. Yeah, but they've been working they've done their 10,000 hours and they've done their work and they do all that. So it's the understanding about value. I'm hopeful that some good can come out of this conversation. I'm like you, Mike. I'm interested to see when the tables turn, what happens. Because here's the one thing I do know about end clients. They have memories like elephants. And they will remember. If their extended team is affected negatively, and when things turn around, they might say, okay, well, now you not only made them pay, but now you've hit my bottom line.
Right.
And when it turns around again, I'm not going to forget that.
Well, and the other piece of it is that we all know that our relationships are built on partnerships. And our whole industry is about relationship building. And when you destroy that relationship, that's going to be a hard road to follow in rebuilding trust. Because if we need to trust each other. We need to be strategic partners.
From a process standpoint, one thing I have shared is that I thought if this is the issue, this issue deserved conversation, dialogue with our partners in the industry. The approach could have been, it's going to be gradual. No, this is my issue. This is where we're going to be in 2 to 3 years. I think that's even a bigger discussion. It's not, even if this is the right point, how we do it. And I always say it's important to do the right thing, but to do it the right way. And I think this is such a complex issue that it deserved conversation, and still does. It deserves dialogue, almost a little bit of a summit to talk about this. But the problem is there's too much emotion now. You can't have that dialogue without it being emotional. And that's a little bit of the challenge. But Michael said something that it stuck with me is, where I know most of those clients, even the third parties we have dealt with, where I know they are working on behalf of their customer, they are hammering me to lower their rate, to get that rate lower, to get the best deal, and realize that is taking money out of their pocket.
Right.
Yeah.
So most of the people really do have their heart in the right place and their focus in the right place, because believe me, it is painful how much they leverage us sometimes. They're doing their job, and I'm always saying they're being a great advocate for their customer. But if you think about the math, once again, if you do the math, every time they're lowering the rate, they just lowered their commission. So if all they cared about was commission, they wouldn't be hammering me for that kind of best deal, and that's how they build their loyalty with their customer, because they're always able to get a good and fair deal for them. So I think that's an interesting one that we to me, it's even higher than Pareto. It's 90% of the industry is doing the right things.
Right.
And there may be that 10%, but then focus on the 10%. But 90% of the industry that I've seen and the professionalism I've seen is exactly that. They're business professionals, and they're working on behalf of their customers.
Well, if there's one thing positive I think that has come out of this so far, is that at least one of our industry association has stepped up to the plate and said, you matter to us. We're going to do that extra step to make sure that you two, as a member of this organization, are taken care of. And so that is positive, because I know the gentleman to my left. No, it's my right.
You're right.
Well, it's a gentleman.
She said gentleman, so it can only be on one
It can only be
side.
on one side. But Michael and I have always had the feeling that the third-party element, the independent business owner, has never had a real stake in the organizations, and have been, yes, they've been members, but now someone's finally paying attention to the fact that they exist.
I smile because I think this is your 2009, and I'm on the U.S. Travel Board as well, and one of the things we talk about is, as painful as it was, and specifically in Las Vegas, probably one of our greatest days was the end of November of 2008 when President Obama said, you cannot take a plane and go.
Right.
How, as devastating as that was to our business in Vegas, as devastating as that was to our industry because of his words, and lost $100 million in cancellations within 6 weeks of the comments.
Wow.
As devastating as that was, we always go back and pinpoint it. It woke us up as an industry to be able to talk with one voice on who we are and what our value is and what we mean as an economic driver, what we mean to draw jobs, what we mean to local economy. We didn't have those facts when we were under attack. And it forced us as an industry to get our act together. This may be that same moment in time, what you were just talking about, where the independents as an industry start to understand and be able to speak to their value and to their proposition, and understand that and become much more clear as a group. I think it's one of those moments in time. I didn't think about it until you guys said it, but it's your 2008.
Yeah.
It really seems to be that at the moment.
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think there's opportunity for the independents themselves, ourselves, and for the associations, for the industry at large to say, okay, let's take a long look at this. I will say, I said that the end user has long memories. Well, we do too, right? And so I will remember what they thought of the contribution that I made, and it was small, next to the large third-party companies. But they didn't recognize the value that we bring. Okay. That hurts me as much for our team as it does for me, because our bottom line is not affected dramatically. It's just not. However, what that says is all of that hard work and experience that they bring to the table and that they have made back in the days when I was working primarily in entertainment, a major agency who represents celebrity acts will tell you, anybody can book this. You can call me, right? And you can do this. But if I've got to babysit you, I have no incentive to give you a better deal.
Right.
Now, if you'll call somebody like me or somebody who does this and knows what they were doing, and I know that all I have to do is sign that contract, and then I can go on to my other contracts, that they've got this. And I think that's the message, that the way this was rolled out, regardless of how you feel about whether or not it's just. It is justice. I mean, it's business. Each business has the right to do their own thing. But the way that it was rolled out was really, I think, a slap in the face of a lot of hardworking people. And it's what it said. I don't know who it was, but I believe it's one of the insurance companies. It said, with us, you're not just a number. Well, apparently, we were just a number, all right? And I'm not sure that was fully thought out, of that message of, okay, I'm not going to miss. If I walk away, if I never source another hotel room, right? Marriott, it's not going to hurt them. It's not going to hurt me either, because I've got the balance. But the fact is that over the years, we have brought a substantial amount of money and a substantial amount of expertise that made the job of that hotel easier, because we knew what we were doing. And the fact that there was no recognition, none of that, I think that's why you're seeing a lot of the anger.
Any indication of other properties, which way they're going on this?
Not that I've heard of. How about you?
No, I mean, just the public announcements you've heard. We've heard of a couple of major brands, and you've had a couple of other brands that have come out. And I do think it's fair to say the ownership models make a difference.
Sure they do.
One of the reasons I talk about our position is, we own and manage our buildings.
Right.
So, our value as a management company is that it's our building and I better be running it well.
Right.
But we look at it a little bit differently, and we lean so much more group than other and not only destinations, but even as a company. So that's probably why you see that. But I know there's a couple, and I don't want to mention other companies, but there's a couple of other companies that are all owned, and they've had a different position and a different stance as well.
Well, then you have some of the more independent companies increasing their.
I agree.
And for them, they may draw some business.
Yeah.
And I never thought of I'll say again, the cool thing about doing this is I learn something new, or I have a thought that I should have had about this strategic meetings management. I never thought of it from that standpoint, but you're right. They've got to make up that shortfall somewhere.
Yeah, and the corporations aren't just going to increase their budget. They're just not going to do it.
Right.
They'll save it somewhere else,
Right.
even if they have an increase there. And that's when you heard me say it's a little bit of a shell game.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I'm curious, as we monitor this, as we come out of it, what happens to rooms revenue or food and beverage revenue, what happens to ancillary revenue, what happens to the other spend, because I think it's going to be safe somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well, and there are probably some that are adopting a wait-and-see attitude to see what happens. But, you know, I think in the end, it's all about relationships and how people are going to feel about them. And that's going to involve the triad, if you will. And someone will be a loser in that battle. It's just going to happen, whether it's, you know, financially impactful or otherwise. But I think the planner and their clients have a good relationship and have for a number of years. And hopefully there will be that support for them going through this transition, if you will.
Okay. Speaking of transitions, important topic for the commission cuts, but also we're going to be discussing room poaching. Is there hope for groups with room block poaching based on recent events?
Nah. No, just let me give you a little bit of a background. All three of us sitting here have been involved in the poaching discussion for a number of years. We had a summit several years ago, and we came out with some pretty good products to assist on what to do, some helpful hints, some best practices, checklists, Attorney General's lists for every state in the United States where someone could file a complaint. And some of those things were very new to what was going on in poaching. And I have to say we were very proud of what we did.
Some good work.
We did some very good work, but it didn't stop the issue. And this most recent litigation, which I call the feathers flying, with the U.S. Poultry Association, was they didn't really get the judgment they did against the company for poaching. They got it for trademark infringement. And I think we have to start looking at the topic and maybe readdressing it as to giving best practices on how people can combat that from those different perspectives.
And how you litigate it.
And how you litigate it, yeah.
Well, this is a subject that's been out there. When we started looking at it with the then Convention Industry Council, researching when the information was out there, and it's been out there 15, 20 years, the issue. And what was happening is there was a lot of discussion around the issue that was based on anecdotal evidence.
Right.
There were a number of assumptions that I think that we went into that summit with, that when we came out of the summit and the research, the data from the Convention Industry Council and the CNPs, we learned that people were affected in ways that were different than what we expected. I think the thing that always was at the top was attrition, and it was way at the bottom when we found out that
their brand and their
brand,
it was controlling the brand and the experience.
Yes.
and the workload of the group, and that. Well, the Events Industry Council, soon to be released, just did a follow-up survey, just completed within the last 30 days, telling us a little bit more. There is some indication that there's some lessening of it in the room block poaching area. Pretty close, I think, probably to the margin of error. But we don't know, but that tells us a little something. But for the first time, we ask about poaching in other areas. And there are poaching incidences now in sponsorships, and exhibit services, and audiovisual.
Printing,
And in a variety of ways. And there's that. And the other thing is there's a bill before Congress, and I'll speak to you directly, people at home. Here's where you can advocate. Here's where you can talk about meetings means business. They're billed in both houses of Congress. It's the Stop Online Privacy Act. that was initiated by the American Hotel and Lodging Association about consumer fraud, business to consumer. Events Industry Council went to them. There is language within that bill that also addresses room block poaching. Now, will that solve the problem? Probably not, but it will put a few more teeth in those cease and desist letters. And that's what we need, is something that clearly identifies this, because we've talked about, is it piracy, is it poaching, is it legal, is it illegal, or is it competition, or what? It helps define what the issue is. These guys are smart. They're shady, but they're smart, right? They're going to move, they're going to stick and move, and if you find out who they are, they're going to change their number and change their name, and they're going to go here and there. That is not going to change. What we have to do is be smarter.
Yeah.
As an industry, we have to be smarter. And frankly, the organizations who are affected by the planning organizations can't do it alone. We got to have partners. But the hotels don't want this any more than the.
No, we see the same problem, and I think the challenge in trying to combat it effectively is that you're relying on our attendees to be well educated on the issue. And that's never going to happen.
Right.
And it's the same reason grandmothers are still sending $1,000 over the phone because somebody calls and they're sending money away and they're getting scammed. We live in that kind of world. And I think that's the biggest challenge. All we can do is try to educate, and re-educate. But it's our attendees at some point that they have to understand, if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true.
Right.
And we said, you really want to solve it? Tell everybody, only book through the block that we send you, or only book through the hotel.
Right.
If you want to be completely protected. But if you're getting all these offers that have nothing to do with the organization, then you shouldn't be booking through them.
Well, and this has been a problem in the consumer area too, as well, is that you Google a hotel and the first 10 hits are not the hotel, but you think they are.
Right.
I had a friend who said, I got a great deal on a hotel room on the beach down in Florida. We're going to take a cruise. I got 3 nights in a hotel before we went down there. I said, awesome. It's unbelievable. You should see the pictures. I saw the pictures. They were beautiful. He said it has ocean views. So I asked him, I said, how'd your trip go? Well, that place we stayed, it had an ocean view. If you stood on the back of the toilet and leaned way out the window, right? So you never know, unless you're dealing directly with the property.
Yeah.
Also, Mike, I don't know about this, but you don't have a lot of recourse. If you're dealing directly with the property and you have an expectation that the property has told you something is a certain way, then you can kind of hold them responsible.
I agree.
If I'm dealing with somebody else, it's like, dude, you're on your own.
Yeah, and we talked about it. I mean, trying to put teeth to it, I think the biggest thing is credit card. Because when you get into financial fraud, you now have an opportunity. If somebody else has, and I always try to scare our people to tell them somebody else has your credit card information,
right?
Not us. And to me, that should be the biggest, the biggest issue for people to understand. You shouldn't be giving your credit card except to people you know.
Right.
And
that's a biggie.
don't forget that these scammers, I call them phantoms in the night, because they do morph overnight. I used to get them all the time. I used to get them from like 5 companies daily, offering me rooms and all that kind of thing. The minute that you and I were named as co-chairs of that summit, I got ice in the wintertime. They forgot my name. So they are very aware of what's going on in the industry, and they're very keenly aware of what's going on in their business.
How is the industry addressing this issue?
Well, I think the Events Industry Council is taking a lead. There is some discussion. Is it better? Is it worse? I think it may be slightly better.
I think so too.
I don't know that it's a huge jump, but I do think it's improving. Why? Because people are more aware, and we finally begun as an industry to provide our community with tools based on data rather than assumptions that were proven incorrect 4 years ago.
I would agree.
All right, so I think that makes sense, and I think that I'm hopeful that we make that kind of impact, that you start to see a reduction in what that happens.
Well, and I would also say mix of business. I mean, what we've seen is a growth in corporate business, and my corporate business tend to come on a rooming list.
Right.
I don't have this issue.
Right.
I have this issue in trade shows citywide. Anything that's call-in, where people are searching for rooms, is where we have this largest issue.
Especially exhibitors.
Exactly.
Right.
And but again, the corporate business has been such the emergence over the last couple of years. I think part of the reason you don't hear more of the noise
Right.
is because a lot of our business is behaving a little differently.
But
It changes from time to time.
But I also think that the awareness that was created over the past 5 years or so, that EIC has taken the lead. I was chair of Apex, you were chair of Apex. You were very heavily involved and contributed immensely to that effort. And the awareness was created. There were tools put out there for
Great.
people to make aware. And I think that even though the impact may be lessening, that unless we are vigilant, it will come back.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point, is that the mix will shift.
Right.
And this will become a louder discussion again.
Yes.
When the shifts. You just said it seems a little quieter. Part of that, I think, is mixed, but it will shift back. I
It
know it
will.
will, and this
Yep.
will be one of the largest problems.
I don't think about it that often because I'm expecting a check from Nigeria any day now. So I'm hoping, that once that comes in, then I'll be staying in the nice suites at MGM, Mike.
There you go.
Well, and don't forget that this decision that was the U.S. poultry decision can be appealed, and something could happen to the large judgment that they got. I think it was $750,000
Yeah.
that they were awarded. I would be surprised if somebody didn't appeal it, but there could be other ramifications from it as well.
Which occurs to me, we talked about other forms of poaching. Is it American Chemical? Do you remember who?
American Chemical Society.
American Chemical Society just won a $4.8 million judgment for poaching of proprietary content.
Yes.
Now these big numbers are exciting, and I know a lot of people got excited around the poultry decision, but they didn't understand what it was. That was on trademark. And the other was on copyright. Still, as Marianne likes to say, you didn't get Al Capone because he shot somebody.
Right.
It's true.
Right? They got Al Capone on
Tax evasion.
income tax evasion.
Yep.
So if you use all the tools that you can, as aware as possible, I do think that educating the end user, and I will tell you, I'll look into the camera and say, planners, I love you. Association planners, you can be absolutely brutal. I promised this individual that I would never use their name, but one of the things that they did when you talk about how they're going to fight this is that on their exhibitor side, is they say you book in the block or we won't accept your freight.
Right.
Wow. So, using all the tools in the deck, every card in the deck, when you're playing it, and there are some creative, and you think, gosh, that's kind of harsh, but is it really? Because the truth is, their bottom line's affected if those people don't stay in the block, even if the people get a hotel room. Never mind the ones that are defrauded or put, miles from the transportation schedule map.
You just gave me an idea. The next step should be we should sell the square footage that includes your hotel room, and you're done. When you bought your booth space, you also got your room, and we're good to go. Because it's already prepaid. You're done.
Interesting.
That's very interesting.
You see, there are one of the practices that we've come across in a couple of instances is that notion of tying it in. Okay, your registration is X.
Right.
If you book in the block. If not, it's X plus.
Right.
Right. And I think that's an effective way to do it. I think most. It is, and there's been interesting talk recently, Marianne, in the Events Industry Council group when we talked about that, and they said, we really have to educate the end user. Well, the industry can't educate the end user. We can educate the show owner, and the show owner must educate the end user.
That's true, but I also think that the exhibitor has that own responsibility. If they want to book outside the block, then they have to take the responsibility for the consequences they incur. How many times can we tell them, don't do it, don't book outside the block, use only our housing bureau or whatever we're doing.
And that's part of the issue. I mean, look, in reality, being an exhibitor in the past, I could have an assistant that's doing that searching for me. It's not always the exhibitor. That's the
Right.
issue. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces to
Right.
it, and that's why it's so hard to get to everybody.
Right.
Because you're always going to just have those type of dynamics. That are
Well, another piece of that pie is the fact that some organizations, association or corporate, a lot of pharma, have in-house travel. Well, I don't mean in-house by that they're there, but they have a selected company, be it a Marriott's, an American Express, whatever that might be. And they have to, by their company's rule, stay at a specific group of hotels. Well, that's fine, but as long as they understand that that isn't the hotel of preference, then they can certainly book outside the block.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and that's I think the more complicated piece, because that'll be a whole nother 30 minutes.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about rooms outside the block, because that continues to be a larger percentage for a variety of reasons, and part of it's compliance to programs internally, and doesn't mean they're not coming to the conference, doesn't mean they're not even in my hotel, it just means they came through a different channel.
Right.
That's becoming more and more prevalent to where it's almost 20% of the business.
And
that we
people
see.
don't think of it.
Yeah, well,
They don't.
they do, but they don't have a choice.
I know.
I mean, that's...
No,
it's
but I'm
part of-
talking about the organizer.
Yeah.
Doesn't think about that. That particular group is maybe won't stay, or they'll stay in another block.
Well, I was going to say, they're thinking about it because I'm having to audit all those rooms. So believe me, they're thinking about it. But that's the world we live in. I just think
Yeah.
it's going to continue to be prevalent.
Well, in the spirit of the sky is falling and everything is terrible, let's talk about GMID. Global Meetings Industry Day.
Well, he's transitioning for you. She was about to throw a
I was about to
transition
go
over
to-
there.
I just had the
GMID. You can get to
opportunity to
GMID.
go up in the spring, and I've been in Nashville for the last 3 or 4 years trying to explain to everybody what it. And you actually began the conversation a few minutes ago by talking about how the industry came together following the crash, and why that's good, right?
Yeah.
And it's great to be able to come together and talk about good news, not only amongst ourselves, but outside the room. We have a beautiful, if you've been to Nashville, beautiful, sparkling convention center. It just turned 5 years old, but 10 years ago, I wouldn't have given you a plug nickel it was going to be built. So we had in Nashville what I call cavemen, which are councilmen against virtually everything, okay? And trying to get something done and explain to them, because we had to start from behind zero. This is why I talk to people about the value of our coming together and speaking and speaking to the impact of the industry, is that now you don't have to start from zero. We've got hard facts, figures, numbers, and you can go to those doubters and say, here's why it makes sense for you to do this. Here's what our contributions are. So I was just getting a little depressed.
No, I'm laughing when you called it GMED, because it's like, even as an industry, God, we have to go to acronyms for
Oh, I
everything.
know.
I
What
know.
started out as Global Meetings Industry Day, he's like, let's talk about GMED.
Yeah.
And that's our industry.
It is.
So, and
It
we,
is.
I only say that
BFD,
facetiously.
Mike.
I only say that because I sometimes think we lose the impact.
Yeah, we do.
Global Meetings
Definitely do.
Industry
That's
Day
right.
is reminding us why it's important.
Right.
And it's that celebration of meetings across the board. But I couldn't have been more proud as far as how global it is, how many countries were involved this year, how big it has become in 3 to 4 years. And candidly, this all started, and I always tell the story, started with MPI. And it's fitting that we're here with MPI,
Yeah.
because this started with the Canadian chapters of MPI.
For
that had had a
years.
National Industry Day,
Yes, they did.
Meetings Industry Day, and they had had it for over a decade.
Canada
Yeah.
Day.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was the year I was chair. Paul Van Deventer and I were in Ottawa, and it was our first experience with it, because Paul had just joined our organization, and we were both blown away. And then the comment was, at the dinner, how cool would this be if we could do this all across North America? And if you remember, we had North American Industry Day before we had global. And the idea just came from there, was how cool would this be? And just as luck would have it, we visited Mexico within that week, and we started the discussions, and they were like, we're all in. And we visited Mexico because we were in Chicago, and they have a sister chapter, Switch, and they happened to be visiting.
Oh.
So all of a sudden we had Canada on board, we had Mexico on board, North American we had covered. And that's how it started to come together. And that's when Meetings Means Business was really formalizing, and then we've literally let that organization took it and ran with it. And when that organization took it and ran with it, it became global.
Right.
Very quickly. And now everybody's involved. But I'm proud to see where it is today, and
Yep.
that we're all celebrating the industry.
But we're also becoming not only more global, we're also becoming more, let me call it worldly, to where the world issues really are being focused on. I applaud MPI for this, because at this meeting here, they are doing training for their chapter leaders on sexual harassment. We know that many hotel brands also do this for their hoteliers on human trafficking, which are huge issues if you look at the statistics. MPI has done this in their magazine, The Meeting Professional, and other organizations, I just don't want to rely on MPI, are also doing awareness sessions at their meetings on this very topic. And that makes me personally very proud that we are not just so introspective that we can't realize that we all live in that world, and there's probably things that as a community we can contribute
Well, and again,
to that
for
value.
your audience out there is an app called Traffic Cam, and it's TRAFFICK.
AFFICK.
Okay,
That's
AFF,
okay.
yes. And
But it's got K.
And Traffic Cam is literally an app that anybody who's trying to make a difference for doing nothing else, it's asking you to take a picture anytime you travel in the hotel room you're in. And they are able to utilize that in databases, almost like facial recognition technology, because most of the ads for human trafficking are taken, or the photos are taken in a hotel room. They can match up hotel rooms. They've actually been able to indict people. They've actually been able to put people away because of it.
Yep.
And in some cases, they've been able to save people. So
Now-
everybody out there, if they do nothing else, download the app, and when you travel, take the pictures.
Now, that doesn't mean selfies.
I don't need any help, by the way.
So we've covered a lot of topics. So there are other issues that should be on radar. I'm assuming GDPR is one of the big issues, talking about global issues.
GDPR is one of the biggest issues, and I don't think we have yet scratched the surface of what that impact might be. But it's going to impact more than most people thought it would when it first came out. And it's very complicated, very detailed.
Well,
I was going to say, I just reported out, and if you looked at what the Wall Street Journal just had a report on it, and you have about 60% of most companies that are somewhat there or will be there. And it's a small gap of where we'll be. In 18 months, this won't be a big discussion.
Nope.
It's the timeline, it's how we're rolling it out. And the challenge you're having is if you're a U.S. company and you have no businesses in the EU, there is an assumption saying, sue us. You'd have to come to a U.S. court. You'd have to get a U.S. judge to agree that I should be following a EU guideline when I have no business there. That's one argument. Now, here's the hard part. My customers have people.
Right.
So no matter what, I'm having to deal with this with the customer. But there is that argument as well. Because if you have companies that are purely U.S.-centric, they are following U.S. law and U.S. policy, and they have no obligation to follow a European regulation. The problem is our customers tend to be global, so we're all getting rolled into it no matter what.
Well, having worked on that for a period of time and spent quite a bit going around and telling people their hair's on fire.
Yeah.
The fact is, any good company wants to know what data they have, how it's being used, and where it'll look. So it is burdensome if you think of it in that way. But if you're running a legitimate business, then you want to follow these principles, right?
The principles, yes. A regulation that talks about reasonable is poorly written.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Right.
That's why everybody is running around with their hair on fire, because it's so poorly written. Anytime you get reasonable, it becomes subjective.
Right.
And that becomes very hard to say, how do I comply with something that is subjective versus being very objective, matter of fact, of this is what you have to be doing. That's the issue everybody's having with the regulation, is the reasonableness. But I have talked to a couple of heads of IT security, and they've all said the same thing. It's like, oh my God, it's 2001 all over again.
Yeah.
Right.
Everybody's running around like the world's going to blow up.
Y2K.
They said, we will figure it out. And that's the comment from everybody. It is just a roadmap. We will figure it out. The issue is trying to go today. Now, what I told everybody today in the session was it goes live. It went live May 25th,
Right.
and on May 26th, the EU sued Facebook, Google, and Amazon. This was always targeted
At
at
big ones.
very specific cases, and that's what this was about.
Right.
So when everyone's running around with their hair on fire,
Right.
it's like that's not what this was all about. It doesn't mean we shouldn't follow the principles, but it doesn't mean as long as you have a roadmap, you should be okay.
Right.
It doesn't mean you have to be there tomorrow. The people that they went after should have been there by May 25th.
That's right.
And it's all going to end up in somebody's court.
Yeah,
Well,
that's it.
And I think another issue that thankfully, I think I said this in the live cast we did last year about that. I'm very proud that all of the industry organizations are looking at emergency preparedness, and that MPI took the step in the investment to connect with NCS4, the National Center for Spectator Sports Safety and Security.
Took you a year to get
I
that.
finally remember the 4 S's. And developing an ongoing 5-year project that's ongoing about establishing norms and standards for emergency preparedness. And huge issue. I mean, we know Las Vegas last year, our community was affected very deeply because that was a country music festival.
Sure.
I know people that were on that stage. And so it's awareness. It's stuff that we've always thought about, but we've never had tools. And even today, Marianne, we went to see the head of NCS for a presentation today, and some of the folks in the audience said, well, I just need a template.
No.
And I said, yeah, that's good, but a template is about content. You need context. You need to understand why you do some of these things. You need to be able to address the differences and how these are living documents, because if I come into this venue this time, I was just down at your place. I think you left town. I understand why.
Intentionally?
But with a client, and it was at the Grand Garden Arena, in fact. And there was a combination of client hired security and what you have to do to work in the MGM Grand Garden Casino. Now, the year before I was down with the same client, I was finished on a Saturday afternoon, leaving for the airport, coming into the venue. Security stopped me, MGM security stopped me. Having been involved in this, I understood why. I was bummed I had to go back, but I knew why. Client came to me and said, I'm so sorry. I said, hold on, don't apologize for them doing their job.
Right.
We have to, and this was before October 1st, is that there is an awareness that we have a responsibility of the duty of care, that we have to work together, and that whether your buildings have the best plan in the world and we have the best plan, if they're not somehow melded and there's not focus on how we work together to make these things work, then it's not happening. There's an awful lot of good work going on in that area. So I think we have a lot to celebrate too.
I do too.
I mean, I'm trying not to be depressed. It won't stop me from going for a drink right after I finish here.
Well, one thing I've been sharing, because I've been on more panels than I ever wanted to on that topic, and one of the things I've been sharing with planners specifically is they have to be spending more time on preparing communication plans.
Right.
Yep.
And the one thing I share with everybody, regardless of what we do as an industry, we know something else will happen someday. And the one thing I try to explain, and it's not just an active shooter, it could be a natural disaster, it could be a lot of different things, but the one thing I share with them is it's important to understand the moment something happens, they are no longer in charge. Say, well, who's in charge? Well, it's our CMO. Great, they're on lockdown. Who's next?
All I
Well, that
wanted-
was our SVP. They're on lockdown too. Who's next?
Yep. But I think the bottom line is, and maybe to close this out, is what I said before on poaching. It is the community, the industry that has to continue to be vigilant about the awareness.
Agreed.
Because there are so many people out there who don't have plan one on what to do in the case of an emergency. And they're not necessarily small companies. So
Yeah, that's definitely one of the bigger issues still
it
out
is.
there.
It's very prevalent.
Well, thank you all for participating and discussing all these important topics. Thank you all for joining us out there. And thank you to Visit Indy for letting us use this beautiful space in the Indiana Convention Center. Again, we're broadcasting live from MPI WEC 2018.